She grabbed a total stranger's arm, dug her fingers into his sleeve and whispered 4 words that would blow up her whole life. "Pretend to be my boyfriend." Across the ballroom, the man who'd abandoned her at her lowest point was walking straight toward her, smiling like he'd already won. What she didn't know was that the stranger she'd just chosen was Commander Jack Mercer, a Navy officer who never lied about anything ever, and who was about to make her lie the truest thing in the room. Before we go on, drop the comment and tell me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels tonight. And if you love a story about a real man standing up when it counts, subscribe and follow the channel. Now let's begin. The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, and every head in the ballroom turned. It wasn't Lila Morgan who dropped it. It was the waiter she'd knocked into while trying to disappear a young man in a white jacket who'd stepped left the same instant she'd stepped right. Both of them locked in that terrible little dance 2 strangers do when they're trying to avoid each other and end up colliding anyway. The glass went up, spun once in the light of 1,000 crystal bulbs, and came down like a small bomb. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," Lila breathed, dropping to a crouch before she'd even thought about it, reaching for the shards with her bare fingers. "Ma'am, please don't. You'll cut yourself." The waiter caught her wrist, gentle, embarrassed. "It's fine. It's my fault. Please stand up." But she couldn't stand up, because from her crouched position, half hidden behind the moving legs and beaded gowns of New York's wealthiest people, she had just seen him. Evan Cross. He was standing near the second bar, one hand in the pocket of a tuxedo that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent, laughing at something with his head tipped back. And on his arm in a dress, the color of blood and diamonds, was a woman Lila had never seen before. Young, radiant, effortless. The kind of woman who had never once in her life had to count out quarters for a subway card. For 1 full second, Lila forgot how to breathe. "Ma'am?" The waiter tried again. "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't. Though her voice came out thin and far away. She rose slowly, keeping her back to the bar, and pressed herself against the nearest pillar like a woman ducking gunfire. Just do the job, she told herself. You are here to work. You are here to check the seating chart, confirm the head table placards, take 3 photos for the client, and leave. That's all. He doesn't even have to know you're here. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at the small leather portfolio she'd been clutching all night. The tools of her trade. The badge that said she belonged here, even in a dress she'd bought off a clearance rack. A modest navy thing, with a hem that hit exactly wrong among all these gowns. She was staff. She was invisible. That was supposed to be a blessing tonight. She risked one glance back over her shoulder. Evan was still laughing. But the woman beside him had leaned in to say something, and Evan's eyes, those eyes Lila had once believed were the kindest she'd ever seen, drifted lazily across the room, the way a man scans a crowd out of pure boredom. And they stopped. On her. Lila felt it like a hand closing around her throat. She saw the exact moment the recognition hit him, the little widening of the eyes, the slow curl of the mouth, the tilt of the head. She knew that expression. She had spent 2 years of her life learning that expression. It was the look Evan wore right before he decided to be cruel and call it charm. He said something to the woman in red. He set down his glass. And he began to walk toward Lila unhurried, savoring it, the way a cat crosses a room toward something small. No, 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 no. She turned to flee. She actually took one step toward the tall glass doors that led out to the terrace, and the cold October night, and freedom. And that was when she collided for the second time in 90 seconds with a wall. Except the wall was a man. He was solid in a way that stopped her completely. And when she stumbled backward, he caught her elbow with one hand, a quick controlled motion, no fumbling, no wasted movement, and steadied her upright before she could fall. "Easy," the man said. His voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't have to raise itself to be heard. "You all right?" Lila looked up. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in a way the tuxedo did nothing to hide. Somewhere in his 40s, with close-cropped hair, going gray at the temples, and a face that was all clean, hard lines. Not handsome exactly, but steady. The way a lighthouse is steady. The way a thing you could set your compass by is steady. There was a small ribbon of medals on his chest that she was too panicked to read. His gray eyes were fixed on her with an expression she couldn't name, calm, assessing, patient. She should have said sorry and moved on. Instead, over the man's shoulder, she saw Evan closing the last 20 feet between them, and every rational thought in her head burned to ash. Her hand shot out. She seized the stranger's forearm, gripped it hard through the fabric, and stepped in close enough that no one else could hear. "Please," she whispered fast, desperate, the words tumbling over each other. "I know this is insane. I know you don't know me. But there is a man walking toward me right now, and I need, please, just for 2 minutes, pretend to be my boyfriend. Please. I'll explain. I'll do anything. Just please don't let go of my hand." The stranger did not pull away. He did not laugh or recoil or ask if she was drunk. He simply looked down at her. Really looked the way a man might study a map of terrain he'd never crossed, and in his eyes, she saw something turning over, some fast, quiet calculation happening behind that unreadable face. Then his hand moved. It slid down from her elbow, found her fingers, and folded around them, warm, firm, deliberate. He turned his body a quarter degree so that he stood not in front of her, but beside her, shoulder to shoulder, the two of them suddenly, a single unit facing the room. It was such a small movement. It changed everything. "Okay," he said quietly. "Just that." And then Evan arrived. Lila Morgan. Evan said her name the way you'd read a punchline off a card, delighted with himself. He stopped a few feet away and looked her up and down, that familiar smirk already in place. "I don't believe it. I heard you were doing, what is it now, party planning, folding napkins for the rich and famous." He glanced at her portfolio and let out a small warm laugh, as if they were old friends sharing a joke. "You clean up okay? I'll give you that." "Evan." Lila's voice barely worked. "You look surprised to see me." He spread his hands. "I'm on the host committee. Big donor. But I have to say, this is a shock. Last I heard you couldn't afford the cover charge at a place like this, let alone—" He stopped. His eyes had finally slid sideways to the man standing beside her, to the hand wrapped around hers, and something flickered across his face. "I'm sorry. Am I interrupting?" There was a beat of silence. Then the stranger spoke. "You are actually," he said. Pleasant, unbothered. He extended his free hand toward Evan, and there was nothing threatening about it. Nothing but courtesy, which somehow made it worse. Jack Mercer. Evan shook it on reflex, the way people do when a hand is offered before they've decided whether they want to. Evan Cross. Jack's fine. He let the handshake go. "And you're a friend of Lila's." The way he said it, a friend of Lila's, put Evan neatly in a box and closed the lid. Not a rival. Not a threat. A friend. A footnote. Evan's smile tightened a fraction. "We go back. Way back. Lila and I were well." He chuckled and looked at Lila directly, and there it was, the cruelty sliding into place. "We were together for a while, weren't we? Before things got complicated. Before you had that whole rough patch." He said rough patch the way you'd hold something up with 2 fingers to keep it from touching you. "How are you doing, by the way? Really? I always wondered." Lila opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because she knew what he was doing, he was reminding her in front of a stranger of the worst months of her life. The ones where she'd lost her job and her apartment, and her mother in the same brutal winter. The ones where Evan had looked at all of it and decided it was too much weight to carry and left. He'd left with a text message. 9 words. She still knew them by heart. Jack Mercer felt her hand tighten in his. "She's doing well," Jack said. Evan blinked. "I'm sorry. You asked how she's doing. I'm telling you. She's doing well." Jack's voice never rose, never sharpened. It just held level and certain, like a man reporting the truth of something he'd witnessed firsthand. "She works too hard, if you want to know. She was up at 5 this morning going over details for tonight, the seating, the sound check, the timing of the program. She noticed a name was misspelled on one of the placards and fixed it before anyone else even walked in. Most people in this room have no idea how much of tonight exists because of her. He glanced down at Lila, and his mouth softened just slightly. So, yeah, she's doing well. Better than well. Lila stared at him. She had never told him any of that. He had made it up every word of it, and yet somehow every word of it was true, or true enough, close enough to the shape of her life, that hearing a stranger say it out loud made her eyes sting. Evan recovered fast. He always had. And you two are together, Jack said. The word landed like a coin dropped in a quiet church. Together, Evan repeated. That's right. How long? Long enough, Jack said, and left it there, and the not explaining was somehow more convincing than any date would have been. Evan's eyes went back and forth between them, hunting for the crack, the tell-the-seam, where the lie showed through. Lila could feel her own pulse in her throat. She was sure, absolutely sure, that Evan would see it, that he'd laugh again louder this time, and turn to the woman in red and say, "Watch this, watch her squirm." But Jack chose that moment to lift Lila's hand, the one he was holding, and press it lightly against his chest, over the ribbons over his heart, in a gesture so unhurried and so casually intimate that it looked like a thing he'd done 1,000 times before. He didn't look at Evan when he did it. He looked at Lila. And he held her gaze with those steady gray eyes, as if the two of them were the only people in a very large, very loud room. "Sorry," he said to her quietly, just for her. "I should have come to find you sooner. I got cornered by the Admiral." And Lila, God help her, understood the assignment. "You're forgiven," she heard herself say. Her voice came out steadier than she'd dreamed it could. This time. Jack agreed, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Something in Evan's face collapsed and reassembled itself into a colder shape. He was not a man who lost, and he did not know how to do it gracefully. "Well," he said, "isn't that something? Lila Morgan dating a, what are you, military Navy? An officer, no less." Evan's eyes went to the medals now, and Lila watched him do the math. The cost of that math, the way a certain kind of man measures another man by the wrong yardstick, and comes up short and hates him for it. Impressive. Genuinely. I didn't think that was your type, Lila. I thought your type was... He smiled. Well, me. People change, Lila said. Do they... Evan tilted his head. Because you look exactly the same to me. Same dress off the rack. Same working the party. Same girl who couldn't quite keep up. He said it lightly, almost fondly. The poison folded so neatly inside the sugar that anyone passing by would have thought he was paying her a compliment. I'm just saying, it's a big room to keep up in. I'd hate to see you get in over your head. Again. And that again was the word that did it. Because Lila felt Jack Mercer go still beside her. Not tense. Not angry. Still in the specific way that a very calm person goes still right before they decide something. She would learn later that this was the most dangerous thing about him, that his anger didn't flare. It focused. "Mr. Cross," Jack said. "Evan." "Mr. Cross," Jack repeated, and the correction was its own quiet answer. "Can I tell you something man to man?" Evan spread his hands magnanimous. "By all means." "I've spent 22 years around people who talk the way you talk," Jack said. "Confident, comfortable, real good at making somebody feel small in a room full of people so no one can see them do it." He wasn't smiling now, but he wasn't glaring either. His face was almost gentle, which made the words land harder. "I've served with men who'd carry another man 40 miles on a broken ankle and never once mention it. And I've met men in nice suits who've never carried anything heavier than a grudge. You learn to tell the difference pretty fast. It's in how they talk about the people who can't fight back." The color drained out of Evan's face, and then rushed back into it, blotchy and hot. "I don't know who you think you are." "I told you who I am, Jack Mercer." He said it without heat. "And I know exactly who she is. Which is why I'm going to ask you politely one time to go enjoy the rest of your evening somewhere on the other side of this room." A pause. The woman in red's been looking for you. You shouldn't keep her waiting." For a moment, Evan just stood there. Lila could see the war in him, the urge to escalate, to say something devastating, to reclaim the ground he'd lost, and the dawning humiliating awareness that there was no version of the next 60 seconds where he came out ahead. Not against this. Not against a man who simply refused to be rattled. "Enjoy your evening," Evan finally said through his teeth. He looked at Lila one last time, and for a flicker of a second, the mask dropped and she saw the real thing underneath. Not love, not regret, but resentment. The pure small resentment of a man who had thrown something away and was furious to discover it had value after all. "Take care of yourself, Lila. You always were. Resourceful." He turned and walked back toward the bar, and Lila Morgan, who had spent the entire evening trying to be invisible, realized that half the ballroom was now watching her. She didn't let go of Jack's hand until they'd made it out to the terrace. The night air hit her like a slap of cold water. Below them, 40 floors down the city, was a river of light. She let go of him, then all at once, and put both hands over her face and stood there for a long moment, just breathing. "I am so sorry," she said into her palms. I don't do things like that. I have never in my life done anything like that. I just grabbed a total stranger and She dropped her hands. "Who are you?" "I told you." A faint smile. "Jack Mercer." "That's a name, not an answer." "Commander, United States Navy." He leaned against the terrace railing, unhurried, giving her space. "I'm here representing a charity that helps the families of sailors who don't come home. That's the whole reason I put on this getup." He tugged once at his bow tie, like it personally offended him. "I hate these things. I was about 90 seconds from leaving when you ran into me." "Ran into you?" "Right." She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "I assaulted you. I grabbed your arm and told you to lie to a room full of millionaires." "You said pretend," he corrected mildly. "Different word. You didn't have to say yes." "No?" He agreed. "I didn't." "Then why did you—" Jack was quiet for a second. He looked out over the city, and the light caught the gray at his temples, and Lila had the sudden disorienting sense that this was a man who chose his words the way other people chose which wire to cut. "Because," he said finally, "when you grabbed my arm, you weren't looking at me. You were looking at him. And I've seen that look before. On people who are about to get hurt by somebody who's already hurt them, and who know it, and who don't have anybody standing next to them." He turned his head and met her eyes. "I've got a rule. When I can put myself between somebody and the thing that's coming for them, I do it. That's it. That's the whole reason. There's no more to it than that." Lila didn't have anything to say to that. She'd spent so long around people like Evan, people who did the math on every kindness, who never gave you a thing without a receipt. That plain decency offered without a price had started to sound like a foreign language. "He was my boyfriend," she said. She didn't know why she was telling him. "For 2 years. I actually thought I was going to marry him. And then I lost my job. And then I lost my apartment. And then I lost my mom, all in about 4 months. And I fell apart, and Evan—" She trailed off. "Evan decided that was more than he'd signed up for, so he left, by text." Jack said nothing, but his jaw tightened, that same focused stillness from before. 9 words, Lila went on, and she could hear the old bitterness creeping into her voice and hated it. "I don't think I can do this anymore. Sorry." Counted the apology. 9 words for 2 years. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "So when I saw him tonight, looking so fine, so happy with his new, I couldn't be the girl he left standing there in her clearance dress one more time. I couldn't. So I grabbed the first solid thing I could find." She looked up at him. I'm sorry. You deserve to know it wasn't personal. It could have been anybody. Could it?" "What?" Jack pushed off the railing and stood up straight, and for a second she thought he was going to say something significant. Instead, a small electronic chirp came from inside his jacket. He reached in, pulled out his phone, and his whole face changed. the commander dissolving in an instant into something younger and warmer, and helplessly soft. "Sorry," he said. "It's my daughter. She's supposed to be asleep." He glanced at the screen and huffed a quiet laugh. "She's not asleep." Lila blinked. "You have a... Grace, she's 8. He typed something with his thumb, still half smiling. "Her sitter's got the flu, so my sister's watching her tonight, and my sister lets her stay up too late, and Grace knows it, so she milks it." He put the phone away and looked back at Lila a little sheepish, as if he'd revealed more than he meant to. "That's the other reason I hate these things. I'd rather be home." And something about that. This big, solid, metal-wearing man who'd faced down Evan Cross without raising his voice, going soft as bread over a text from an 8-year-old who wouldn't go to sleep, undid something in Lila's chest that she hadn't even known was clenched. "You're a single dad," she said quietly. 3 years now." He said it simply the way you'd report the weather, but she heard the whole weight underneath it. "Her mother passed. It's just the two of us. And my sister when I can't be there. And the Navy, which never seems to consult my calendar." "I'm sorry." "Yeah." A breath. "Me too. Every day. But Grace..." The smile came back. "Grace is the best thing I ever did. Everything else is just weather." They stood there for a moment, two strangers on a cold terrace 40 floors above Manhattan. The party, a muffled roar behind the glass. And Lila realized with a kind of vertigo that she felt safer standing next to this man she'd known for 11 minutes than she had in the entire 2 years she'd spent with Evan Cross. "I should get back in there," she said reluctantly. "I still have to finish the job. 3 photos, confirm the head table. It's why I came." "I'll walk you." "You don't have to keep..." "Lila." It was the first time he'd said her name, and it stopped her. "There are 40 people in that room who just watched us. If I dump you at the door and vanish, half the story falls apart, and the other half is worse. Now you're the girl a man walked away from twice in one night, and I'm not putting you through that. So, I'll walk you back in. I'll stand next to you while you do your job. And when you're done, I'll walk you to a cab, and we'll shake hands, and that'll be that. Nobody gets to make you feel small on my watch." He offered his arm. "Deal." Lila looked at the offered arm, at the ribbons, at the steady gray eyes. "Deal," she said, and took it. Walking back into that ballroom on Jack Mercer's arm was one of the strangest experiences of Lila Morgan's life. She had entered the first time as staff invisible useful beneath notice. Now the same crowd parted for her. Now she caught the whispers, the glances, the sudden warm smiles of people who 20 minutes ago wouldn't have registered her existence. A woman in emerald touched her elbow and said what a lovely couple they made. A silver-haired man Lila recognized from the donor list clapped Jack on the shoulder and said, "Mercer, didn't know you had a better half, you dog." And Jack said something easy and deflecting, and Lila stood there and smiled and felt like she was watching the whole thing from the ceiling. "This isn't real," she kept reminding herself. "None of this is real." In 20 minutes, he shakes your hand and gets in a cab and goes home to Grace, and you will never see him again, and on Monday you'll be back at your desk, and this will be a story you don't tell anyone because they won't believe it. But she couldn't quite make herself let go of his arm. She did her job. She confirmed the head table placards. She took her 3 photos. Jack stood a respectful half-step behind her the whole time, silent, patient, and every so often someone would try to draw him into conversation, and he'd answer briefly and courteously, and then his attention would drift right back to her, and Lila would feel it land on her like sun through a window. It was, she thought, the most convincing performance she'd ever seen. He was so good at it. The way he watched her. The way he'd touched her hand to his chest. The way he'd said she's doing well, like he'd been carrying the fact of her around for years. It was only later, much later in the cab home alone, her forehead against the cold window, that a small dangerous thought would surface and refuse to go back down. What if he wasn't performing? But that was later. First there was the end of the night, and the thing that happened right before it. The thing that changed the shape of everything that came after. They had almost made it out. Lila's work was done. Her portfolio zipped shut, her coat retrieved. Jack was steering them toward the doors with one hand light at the small of her back, a gesture she was already alarmingly getting used to when a voice cut across the marble. "Commander Mercer." They both turned. A woman was crossing the ballroom toward them at speed. 60s elegant iron gray hair pinned up, wearing the particular unshakable authority of someone who signs very large checks. Behind her trailed a small entourage. And behind them, at a careful distance, Lila spotted Evan Cross, watching his new girlfriend, forgotten at the bar, his whole attention fixed on them like a hawk that hadn't given up. "Mrs. Ashford," Jack said, and Lila felt him straighten beside her. "It's an honor. Thank you for having us." "Nonsense. The honor is entirely mine. The work your foundation does is—" Mrs. Ashford waved this away and fixed her sharp eyes on Lila. "And this is the young woman everyone's talking about. Oh, don't look surprised, dear, in a room like this. You two have been the only interesting thing all night." She took Lila's hand in both of hers. "I'm Eleanor Ashford. This entire gala is my little project, and you are Lila Morgan." Her mouth had gone dry. "Morgan, and what do you do, Lila Morgan?" Lila felt the whole night hanging on the answer. She could say it. "I'm staff. I planned part of tonight. I fixed the placards." It was the truth. It was nothing to be ashamed of. But before she could speak, Jack did. "Lila's one of the reasons tonight ran the way it did," he said warmly. "She works with the events team. Everything you saw works smoothly, the timing, the flow, the seating, a lot of that's her. I keep telling her she should be running the whole operation, not just this one." Mrs. Ashford's eyebrows rose with real interest. "Is that so?" And Lila watched dizzy as Jack Mercer took the humiliating truth Evan had tried to use against her party planning, folding napkins, working the party, and simply turned it over in the light so that everyone could see it wasn't a weakness at all. It was competence. It was work. It was worth something. "It's so," Lila managed. "I love what I do." "Well," Mrs. Ashford squeezed her hand. "A woman who loves her work and has the good sense to attach herself to a man like the commander here. I like you already, Lila Morgan. You'll give me your card before you leave. I have 3 more of these dreadful events this year, and my current planner has the imagination of a doorstop." She released Lila's hand, patted Jack's arm, and swept off with her entourage in tow. For a moment, Lila couldn't move. A card. Eleanor Ashford. The Eleanor Ashford, whose name was on a wing of the Met, had just asked for her card. 3 events. That wasn't a job. That was a career. That was the kind of break she'd been grinding toward for 6 years, the kind she'd started to believe simply didn't come to people like her. And it had come because a stranger with medals on his chest had decided for no reason at all to stand beside her and tell the truth about her, a little louder than she'd ever dared to tell it herself. "Jack," she said. Her voice wasn't working right. "Jack, do you know what you just—" "I didn't do anything." He was watching her face, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't read. "I told her what was true. That's all. You did the rest years ago before either of us walked in here tonight." "That's not—" She shook her head, overwhelmed. "People don't— Nobody just does that. There's always a catch. Yeah, you said." Jack's jaw worked. "You keep expecting the bill to come. I noticed that about you in the first 30 seconds. He said it gently, but it landed like a hand pressed flat against a bruise. "I don't know what he did to you over those 2 years on top of the leaving, but somewhere along the line, somebody taught you that kindness is a transaction, and that's—" He stopped himself. Reset. "That's not my business. You don't owe me an explanation. And you sure as hell don't owe me anything else." Across the room, Evan Cross was still watching. Lila could feel it. And she understood suddenly that the story wasn't over, that a man like Evan didn't lose a public contest and simply let it go, that he'd be back, that he'd want proof, that he'd try to tear the whole thing down, just to prove she'd never deserved to have it in the first place. But right now, in this moment, standing next to Jack Mercer, with Eleanor Ashford's promise still ringing in her ears, Lila Morgan did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She stopped waiting for the bill. "I don't even know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to." Jack glanced at his watch, and the softness crept back into his face. Grace waiting wide awake, milking her bedtime for all it was worth. "I've got to get home. My kid's turning my sister's living room into a crime scene as we speak." He hesitated. Then, more carefully than he'd said anything all night. "Look, tonight got complicated. And you've got a man in this room who I don't think is done making trouble for you. So." He reached into his jacket, took out a plain white card, and held it out to her between two fingers. "That's my number. Not because you owe me anything. Because if he comes at you again tonight next week whenever you shouldn't have to grab a stranger's arm and hope he's a decent man, you should just be able to call one." Lila looked at the card, at the neat black print. J. Mercer, a phone number, nothing else. She took it. And that was the moment, though neither of them knew it yet, though both of them would have laughed if you'd told them that a lie whispered in desperation across a crowded ballroom quietly permanently began to turn into something true. She slipped the card into her portfolio next to the placards and the seating charts and all the small proofs of a life she'd built alone. She looked up at Commander Jack Mercer, single father, decorated officer, the most solid thing in a room full of glittering people who were mostly hollow. "Go home to Grace," she said softly. "And Jack, thank you, really, for tonight, for all of it. Get home safe, Lila Morgan." He gave her a small nod, that steady gray gaze holding hers one last second. "And do me one favor." "Anything." "Next time somebody like him makes you feel small." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Remember, Eleanor Ashford wanted your card, not his." Then he turned and walked toward the doors unhurried, certain a man who had done a decent thing and expected nothing back for it. Lila stood alone in the middle of the ballroom, holding her portfolio against her chest like a shield, and watched him go. And across that vast bright room near the bar, Evan Cross watched her, watched the way she watched Jack leave, watched the color in her face, watched something he did not like at all. He set down his drink, and Lila, feeling his eyes on her, lifted her chin, turned her back on him for the first time in 2 years, and walked out of that gala a different woman than the one who'd walked in. Not because of the man who'd left her once by text, but because of the one who'd stood beside her all night and asked for nothing at all. The card in her portfolio felt like it was burning a hole straight through the leather. She had no idea yet how badly she was going to need that number. She had no idea what Evan Cross was already planning, or what it would cost her, or how many times in the coming weeks she'd take out that plain white card and stare at it and not call. She only knew as the elevator doors slid shut and the roar of the party finally fell away to silence one single terrifying, impossible thing. She was already dreading how much she wanted to. The card stayed in Lila's portfolio for 11 days before she found a reason to hate it. She told herself she wasn't going to call. That had been the whole point. The story ended at the elevator the way stories like that were supposed to end. She'd gone home, hung the navy dress back in the closet, and gone to work Monday like nothing had happened. And for about a week, nothing did. Then Eleanor Ashford's assistant called. "Ms. Morgan, this is Diane from the Ashford Foundation. Mrs. Ashford would like to bring you on for the spring calendar. 3 events, possibly a 4th. She's asked me to send over the contracts today." A pause, the sound of papers. "She was very specific that she wanted you, by the way. She said, and I'm quoting, the girl with the good taste and the handsome commander. Does that sound right?" Lila had to sit down on the edge of her desk. Yes. That sounds right. Wonderful. I'll email the paperwork within the hour." She hung up and stared at her computer screen without seeing it. 3 events. The Ashford name. This was the thing she'd wanted for 6 years delivered in a single phone call, and it had come to her because of a lie she'd told a stranger and a truth he'd told for her. She didn't call Jack to tell him. She thought about it, picked up her phone twice, put it down twice. It felt like too much. It felt like pulling on a thread she wasn't sure she wanted to unravel. So she told no one, signed the contracts, and let herself believe for a few more days that the night at the gala was going to stay clean and finished and hers. That belief lasted until Thursday, when her boss called her into the conference room and closed the door. "Sit down, Lila." Marcus Weir ran the events firm, and he had never once in 6 years asked Lila to sit down. She sat. "I got a call this morning," Marcus said. He wouldn't look at her. He was turning a pen over and over in his fingers. "From a member of the Ashford Host Committee. A donor. Big one." Something cold started at the base of Lila's spine. "Evan Cross," she said. Marcus looked up sharply. "You know him?" "I used to." Her voice came out very flat. "What did he say?" "He said..." Marcus set the pen down. "He said he had concerns about your professional conduct at the gala. That you'd misrepresented yourself. That you'd been passing yourself off as a guest, as somebody's date, while you were on the clock working an event for us." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. He implied it made the firm look bad. He implied he'd be reconsidering some referrals if it wasn't addressed. Those were his words. Addressed. Lila sat very still. She understood immediately and completely what was happening. Evan hadn't been able to beat Jack. He hadn't been able to beat her, not standing next to Jack. So he'd waited, and he'd found the one place she was soft, her job, her livelihood. The thing she'd built alone with no one standing beside her, and he'd gone for it. "That's not what happened," she said quietly. "I'm sure it's not." Marcus finally met her eyes, and there was sympathy there, but underneath it was something worse. The calculation of a man deciding how much a person was worth against how much trouble they cost. "But Lila, this guy is connected. He's on 3 boards. He plays golf with half our client list. And I can't have him telling people we let staff run around pretending to be..." He stopped. "What did happen? Just tell me straight." So she told him. Most of it. She left out the parts that were nobody's business, the 2 years, the 9-word text her mother, and she gave him the bones. Her ex was at the gala. He'd approached her cruelly publicly. She'd panicked and asked a guest to help her save face. The guest had agreed. She'd finished her job exactly as assigned and left. She had misrepresented nothing to anyone who mattered. Marcus listened. And when she was done, he was quiet for a long moment. "I believe you," he said, "for what it's worth. But this guy is going to keep making noise, and I've got a firm to run, and..." He spread his hands helpless, and she watched the decision arrive on his face before he said it. "I think it's better for everybody if you take the Ashford account and go independent. Take it with you. Clean break. You'd have made the jump in a year or 2 anyway. We both know that. This just speeds it up." Lila almost laughed. "You're firing me." "I'm not firing you. You're firing me because a man I dated 2 years ago made a phone call." She stood. She was surprised to find her legs held her. "Say it plainly, Marcus. I've earned that much." Marcus looked at her, and to his credit he didn't flinch. "I can't afford to fight Evan Cross over 1 employee. I'm sorry. I really am. You're the best I've got, and I'm still saying it, which should tell you how scared of that guy I am." He slid a folder across the table. "Severance. It's more than I have to give you. And the Ashford account is yours free and clear. That's not nothing, Lila." She took the folder. It wasn't nothing. It was in fact exactly the shape of the thing she'd been afraid of her whole adult life, the bill arriving. She'd let herself have 1 good night, 1 stroke of luck, 1 card from a decent man, and here came the invoice right on schedule. "Thank you for the severance," she said, because she'd been raised to say thank you even while the floor dropped out from under her. And she walked out of the conference room, past the desks where she'd worked for 6 years, down in the elevator, and out onto the sidewalk, where she stood in the cold with a folder in her hands, and Evan Cross's fingerprints all over her ruined week. She got Jack Mercer's card out of her portfolio. She stood there and looked at it. J. Mercer. A phone number, nothing else. She didn't call, because calling him would mean admitting that the night at the gala hadn't ended at the elevator, that it had roots, now that it had reached into her real life and pulled something up by the seams. and it would mean asking a stranger for help a second time, and she'd sooner have walked into the river than do that. She'd learned her lesson about needing people. She'd learned it in 9 words 2 years ago. You did not lean on someone unless you wanted to feel them step away. She put the card back. She went home. She did not call. Jack called her instead. It was 3 days later, a Sunday evening, and she almost didn't answer because she didn't have his number saved, and she'd stopped answering unknown numbers around the time Evan's lawyer had started leaving messages about a mutual friend's estate. But something made her pick up. Lila Morgan. She knew the voice instantly. Low, even steady as a keel. Her heart did something complicated. Jack. Yeah. Hey. Sorry to... I hope this is okay. I got your number from Eleanor Ashford, if you can believe it. She called me to gush about hiring you, and she just handed it over like it was nothing. A pause. I probably shouldn't have, but I heard something, and I wanted to check on you directly instead of getting it third hand. Lila closed her eyes. You heard I got fired. I heard your firm restructured. She could hear the quote marks around it. Eleanor's version. But I've been around long enough to know what it sounds like when somebody with money leans on somebody without it. So, that's what happened. That's what happened. Cross. She sat down on her couch. Outside the window, the city was doing its Sunday evening thing oblivious. He called my boss, said I misrepresented myself at the gala, said I was passing myself off as your date while I was on the clock. Made it sound like I don't know. Like I'd committed fraud. My boss got scared and cut me loose. She heard herself laugh, and it wasn't a good sound. Congratulations, Commander. You helped me for one night, and I lost my whole career by Thursday. That's the going rate for standing next to me, apparently. You should know that going forward. The line was quiet for a moment. That's not on you, Jack said. You know that, right? That's not Lila. That's a grown man deciding to burn down a woman's livelihood because she didn't cry when he tried to make her cry. That's on him. All of it. Don't you dare pick up the check for what he did. You keep saying that. Her throat was tight. You keep telling me not to pick up the check, but I'm the one standing on the sidewalk with a folder full of severance, Jack. Not him. Him they invite to the next gala. Me they restructure. So forgive me if the check feels pretty firmly in my hands. Yeah, Jack said. I hear that. You're right. That's real, and it's not fair, and I'm not going to pretend it is. A pause. But here's the other thing that's real. Eleanor Ashford wants you for 3 events. Cross can't touch that because Eleanor doesn't scare. I've met her. That woman would stare down a hurricane. And you've got a severance check and a marquee client and no boss taking a cut anymore. So you're not standing on a sidewalk with nothing. You're standing on a sidewalk with the beginning of your own firm. It doesn't feel like it tonight, but that's what it is. Lila didn't say anything. She was crying quietly in a way she hadn't let herself do in front of another person in a very long time, and she was grateful at least that he couldn't see it over the phone. You still there? Jack asked gentler. I'm here. You okay? No, she said, and it came out cracked and honest. No, I'm not okay. I lost my job, Jack. I've had that job for 6 years. I was the best. They had. My boss said that he said it right to my face while he was firing me, and it didn't matter because a man with money decided I was inconvenient. And you know what the worst part is? She wiped her face with the back of her hand. The worst part is, I keep thinking, of course. Of course this happened. Because good things don't just come to me and stay. There's always a string, a catch a bill. Every time, my whole life. And I let myself forget that for one night at that stupid gala one night, and this is what I get for forgetting. Lila. What? That thing you just said, about good things not staying, about the catch. His voice had changed quieter, but with something underneath it, some current. How long have you believed that? She laughed wetly. I don't know. Forever. Since I was a kid, probably. My dad left when I was 9. My mom worked herself into the ground and then got sick and then died. Every guy I ever dated turned out to have a catch. Evan was just the last one and the worst one because I actually believed him. She pressed the heel of her hand to her eye. So yeah, forever. I believe it forever. Can I tell you something? Jack said. And I need you to actually hear it, not just wait for me to finish talking. Okay. I don't have a catch. He said it simply the way he'd said everything at the gala, the way he'd said she's doing well and I'll walk you, and that's the whole reason there's no more to it. I called you tonight because I heard you got hurt, and I wanted to know you were standing. That's it. I don't want anything. I'm not building up to anything. There's no bill coming from me, not tonight, not next week, not ever. You can hang up this phone right now and never talk to me again, and I will have zero complaints, because helping you was never alone. It was just the right thing to do, and I did it, and it's done, and you don't owe me a red cent. A breath. But I'd rather you didn't hang up, if I'm being honest. I'd rather you didn't. Lila sat very still on her couch phone pressed to her ear, and felt the whole architecture of how she understood people quietly groan under the weight of a man who kept refusing to behave the way people were supposed to behave. Why? She said. Why would you rather I didn't? There was a long pause. When Jack spoke again, he sounded for the first time slightly less than perfectly steady. Because I liked standing next to you, he said. At the gala. That's not a line. I'm bad at lines, ask anybody. I mean it plain. I spent the whole night doing a thing I said I'd do to help you. And somewhere in there it stopped being a thing I was doing to help you, and started being a thing I just liked. Standing there. Next to you. Telling that guy the truth about you. And then I went home, and Grace was still up. Of course she was up, and she asked me how the party was, and I said it was fine. And then I sat on the edge of her bed, and I realized I was thinking about you. Which I hadn't thought about somebody like that in 3 years. Not once. Not since her mother. His voice was very quiet now. So, that's why I'd rather you didn't hang up. That's the whole embarrassing truth of it. You can do with that whatever you want. Lila didn't breathe. In the window, a siren went by 40 floors down, thin and far away. Jack, she said finally. I just lost everything. I'm not in any shape to. I know. I don't trust it. Any of it. I want to and I can't. And that's not about you. It's about 9 words in a text message 2 years ago. And it's about my dad. And it's about every single time I let myself believe somebody and got left holding the check. I cannot do it again. I don't have another one of those in me. I would rather be alone forever than get left one more time. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yeah, Jack said softly. I understand exactly what you're telling me. I've got a version of it myself. Grace's mom didn't leave. She died. But I still spent 3 years not letting anybody near either one of us because near is where it hurts when they go. So yeah, I get it. I get it better than you'd think. A pause. I'm not asking you for anything, Lila. I want to be real clear about that because I think you've had a lot of men in your life who said they weren't asking for anything and meant the exact opposite. I'm not doing that. I'm just telling you where I am. And then I'm going to let you decide where you are on your own time with no pressure from me, because that's the only way it'd ever be worth anything anyway. She was crying again, and this time she didn't try to hide the sound of it. You're not real, she said. Men like you aren't real. You're a character somebody made up. Jack actually laughed at that, a low, warm, surprised sound. Tell that to my daughter at 6 a.m., when I've burned the pancakes for the 3rd day running. She'll set you straight real fast on how not perfect I am. Lila laughed too, despite everything, a hiccuping wet laugh that turned back into crying halfway through. And for a while, neither of them said anything. And it was the most comfortable silence she could remember sharing with another human being, the two of them just breathing on opposite ends of a phone line, 40 floors up, and however many miles apart, not pretending, not performing, not selling each other anything. I'm going to make you a deal, Jack said eventually. I'm scared of your deals. Your last deal is why I'm unemployed. This one's easier. She could hear the smile. No lies in it. Here's the deal. You take that severance and that Ashford contract and you build your firm. And you don't call me because you need saving, and I don't call you because I'm building up to something. But if you want to no catch, no bill, you call me, and I'll answer, and we'll figure out one small thing at a time whether men like me are real. And if at any point you decide you're done, you say so, and I'm gone. No hard feelings. I mean it. That's the whole deal. That's everything. Lila wiped her face. That's a terrible deal for you. How do you figure you're doing all the work and taking all the risk, and I could bail at any second? Lila. His voice went soft. That's what it's supposed to look like, when it's real. That's the whole difference between me and the guy who sent you 9 words. He wanted it to cost you everything and him nothing. I'm telling you, I'll carry the risk because you've been carrying it your whole life, and somebody ought to trade you seats for a while. And that somebody ought to trade you seats for a while was the sentence that broke the last thing in Lila Morgan that was still holding the door shut. She didn't say yes to the deal. Not that night. She wasn't ready, and he didn't push, and they hung up 20 minutes later after she'd told him about the Ashford contracts, and he'd told her about Grace's science project, a papier-mâché volcano that had erupted prematurely all over his sister's kitchen. It was the most ordinary conversation, and it left Lila lying awake half the night staring at the ceiling, terrified in a way that had nothing to do with Evan Cross. Because Evan, she knew how to survive. Evan was a known quantity, a bill a catch, a man who took. She'd built her whole self around surviving men like Evan. She had no idea what to do with a man who only wanted to trade her seats. The next 2 weeks moved fast. She rented a tiny office, barely more than a closet, and hung out her own shingle, Morgan Events. The Ashford account came through exactly as promised, and Eleanor Ashford turned out to be the best kind of client, demanding, decisive, and fiercely loyal once you'd earned it. Word got around the way it does that Eleanor Ashford had a new planner she was thrilled with, and by the end of the month, Lila had 2 more inquiries she hadn't chased. She and Jack talked almost every night. It started small, the way he'd promised. A text. A question about her day. Then a phone call that ran an hour, then 2 hours. He told her about the Navy, about the 22 years, about the friends he'd lost, and the ones he'd carried, and the reason a room full of medals meant less to him than one science project glued to a kitchen table. She told him about her mother, all of it, the part where she'd sat by the hospital bed alone because Evan had already decided it was too much. Jack didn't try to fix it. He just listened, and at the end he said, "You shouldn't have been alone for that." And something about the plainness of it undid her all over again. She met Grace by accident. She hadn't meant to. She and Jack had been careful about that line, both of them aware that an 8-year-old was not a thing you introduced into a maybe. But Grace had gotten hold of Jack's phone during one of their calls, and before Jack could stop her, a small, imperious voice had come on the line, demanding to know who Lila was and whether she liked horses. Yes, Lila had said, caught completely off guard. I like horses. Real ones, or just the idea of them. Both. That's the correct answer. Grace had informed her gravely, and then Jack had gotten the phone back, mortified, apologizing. And Lila had laughed so hard she'd cried, and something in her chest had cracked open the rest of the way, because she understood in that moment that this was the whole of it. This was what Jack had been protecting. This fierce small person with opinions about horses, and he'd let Lila hear her voice, which meant more than any medal or any promise ever could. She didn't say yes to the deal in words even then, but she stopped waiting for the bill. She noticed it happening the way you notice a fever breaking. One morning she woke up and reached for her phone to text Jack, "Good morning," before she'd even fully remembered to be afraid, and she lay there holding the phone and thought, oh no, I'm in it now. And that was exactly when Evan Cross came back. He didn't call her firm this time. He was smarter than that. He'd learned that hurting her professionally had only made her stronger and more independent, and it had, if anything, made her more interesting to the people whose opinions he cared about. So he changed his angle. He went after the one thing she'd let herself start to want. The message came on a Tuesday. Not from Evan directly, from a number she didn't recognize, a woman's name. She didn't know one of Evan's endless network of connected people, but the fingerprints were his. Thought you should see this before you get in too deep. People are talking. just looking out for a fellow professional. Attached was a photo and a link to a gossip account that covered the charity gala circuit, and a headline that made Lila's blood go cold. The photo was of her and Jack at the gala. That night, Jack's hand pressed to his chest, her hand under his, the two of them looking at each other. It was a beautiful photo, actually. Anyone could see there was something real in it. Which was the point. Because the caption underneath it, written by whoever ran the account, fed whatever Evan had whispered into their ear, read, "Who is the mystery woman on the arm of decorated Navy Commander Jack Mercer? And does she know he's been playing the grieving widower card for donors while quietly dating an event planner? He met the same night sources say the whole romance was staged for the cameras at last month's Ashford Gala. A source close to Commander Mercer's late wife's family says they're heartbroken to see her memory used this way." There was more. It got worse from there. It took the truest thing that had happened to Lila in years, the thing she'd finally terrifyingly let herself start to believe in, and turned it into exactly what Evan had said it was from the beginning. A performance. A staged romance. A lie. And it dragged Grace's dead mother into it to do the maximum damage. Lila sat at her tiny desk in her tiny new office and read it 3 times, and with each reading she felt the old belief rise back up out of the ground, where she'd buried it whole and cold and familiar, of course. Of course. There's always a catch. There's always a bill. Her hands were shaking when she picked up the phone, but this time, and she would think about this later, would understand that it was the whole hinge of everything. This time she wasn't calling Jack because she needed saving. She was calling him because someone was coming for him. For Grace. For a dead woman who couldn't defend herself. And every instinct she had, every protective thing she'd spent her whole life turning only on herself, swung around and pointed outward at the people she'd somehow against. All her rules started to love. He answered on the second ring. "Hey you, I was just about to—" "Jack." Her voice came out low and hard. "Are you sitting down because we have a problem, and it's bad, and it's about Grace's mother, and I need you to listen to me very carefully." There was a pause. She heard him close a door. When he spoke again, the warmth was gone, and the commander was back. The man who went still and focused instead of loud. "Tell me," Jack Mercer said. "Right now. All of it." And Lila Morgan, who had spent her whole life certain that leaning on someone meant feeling them step away, took a breath and did the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do again. She trusted him with the whole terrible truth, and she did not let go of the phone. She read him the whole thing word for word, and Jack listened without interrupting once. She could hear him breathing on the other end, slow and controlled, and she knew enough about him now to understand that the silence wasn't calm. It was the opposite of calm. It was a man holding something very heavy, very still, so it wouldn't crush anyone standing nearby. "Read me the last part again," he said when she'd finished. "The part about Sarah's family. Sarah." It was the first time she'd heard him say his late wife's name. "A source close to Commander Mercer's late wife's family says they're heartbroken to see her memory used this way." "There is no source close to Sarah's family," Jack said very quietly. "Sarah's family is her mother in Ohio, who calls me every Sunday and sends Grace $20 in a card on her birthday, and who would sooner cut off her own hand than say a word against me. Nobody talked to them. Nobody talked to anybody. This is invented. From the ground up. Somebody sat down and made this out of nothing to hurt us." A pause. "And they used her. They used a dead woman who spent the last 6 months of her life teaching our daughter to read so Grace wouldn't fall behind while I was deployed. They used that to score a point against you, Jack. Where's Cross right now? Do you know?" "No, I don't. This didn't even come from him directly. It came from some woman I've never heard of, and the link goes to one of those gossip accounts that cover the gala circuit. But it's him. I know it's him. This is exactly the kind of thing he does. He never puts his own hands on the knife. He finds somebody else to hold it, and he just points. Yeah." Jack's voice was grim. "That tracks. I've served with officers like that. The ones who never sign the order, but somehow the bad thing always happens right after they leave the room. A breath. Okay. Here's what I need from you. I need you to send me everything, the message, the number it came from, the link, all of it. Screenshots, timestamps. Don't delete anything. And then I need you to do something that's going to be very hard for you. What? Nothing. He said it gently. I need you to do nothing. For a day. I need you not to call that account, not to comment, not to try to fix it, not to defend yourself, not to defend me, not to do a single thing. Because I know you, Lila, 3 weeks, and I already know you. And I know that right now, every part of you wants to pick up that check and carry it and make it your fault and fix it alone. And I need you to not do that. This one's not yours to carry. Lila's throat closed. He was exactly right. That was the terrible part. She was already 3 drafts into a message she was going to send the gossip account. Already rehearsing how she'd take the blame, already calculating how to make herself small enough that they'd leave Grace's mother alone. They dragged Sarah into it because of me, she said. Her voice cracked. Jack, if I'd never grabbed your arm that night, none of this. Grace's mom would just be, she'd be at rest, and instead, her name is on some website next to mine because I panicked at a party. This is my fault. It is completely my... Don't. The word came out flat and final. The commander's voice, the one she imagined, stopped arguments dead on the deck of a ship. Then softer immediately. I'm sorry. I don't mean to bark at you, but I need you to hear me. What happened to Sarah's name today is not because you grabbed my arm at a gala. It's because a grown man decided to weaponize a dead woman to get at a living one he couldn't control. There is exactly one person whose fault this is, and it isn't you, and it isn't me, and it sure as hell isn't Sarah. A pause. You keep trying to sign your name at the bottom of other people's crimes, Lila. I'm asking you to put the pen down. She was crying again quietly, the way she'd learned to do it so no one would hear. But he heard. You're crying. I'm not. You are. That's okay. Cry. But send me the screenshots first, and then let me carry this for a day, and then we'll talk. Can you do that? Can you let me have it for one day? And Lila Morgan, who had never in her adult life handed a problem to another person and walked away from it, sat at her tiny desk in her tiny office and did the hardest thing Jack had ever asked of her, harder than the lie at the gala, harder than trusting him on the phone. Okay, she whispered. One day. One day, he agreed. Send the screenshots, and Lila, eat something tonight. You forget to eat when you're scared. I've noticed. She laughed wetly, helplessly. How do you notice these things? 22 years of watching people under pressure. And an 8-year-old who forgets to eat when she's upset about a spelling test. You'd like each other. You're exactly the same. A beat. Send the screenshots. I'll call you tomorrow. Try to sleep. She sent the screenshots. She did not sleep. But she also, for the first time in her life, did nothing. She sat with a problem burning a hole in her chest, and she did not pick up the pen because a man had asked her to trust him for one day, and she was finding out to her own astonishment that she could. What Jack did with that day, she only learned in pieces. The first piece came the next morning, when the gossip account's post simply vanished. No correction, no apology, just gone as if it had never existed. Lila refreshed the page 4 times before she believed it. The second piece came at noon when Eleanor Ashford called her personally. Lila, dear, I saw the nonsense somebody posted about you and the commander yesterday. I want you to know I made 2 phone calls this morning and it has been taken care of, and I want you to know why. Eleanor's voice was crisp as a starched collar. That account runs on access, on being invited to the parties on the tips from people like me. It exists entirely because people with money let it. And I have just informed its charming little proprietor that if a single further word appears about you or the commander or that man's late wife, it will find itself uninvited from every event I fund for the rest of its natural life, which is to say, all of them. A pause, and then warmer. Nobody uses a dead mother to sell clicks on my watch, dear. I buried a husband. I know exactly what that woman's family would feel reading it, and I won't have it. Lila had to sit down. Mrs. Ashford, I don't know how to thank you. You thank me by planning me a spectacular spring benefit and by not letting small men make you feel small. Now, there's one more thing, and I debated telling you, but I think you should know who you're dealing with. Eleanor's voice dropped. The number that message came from the woman who sent it to you. I know her. She's a hanger-on. Does little favors for people who fund her lifestyle. And when I asked her quite directly who had asked her to send that message to you, she folded like a cheap tent. A pause. It was Evan Cross, dear. Of course it was. He gave her the photo and the story and asked her to pass it along, and then he fed the same story to the account through a different channel so his name would never touch it. He's been very busy for a man pretending not to care about you at all. There it was spoken out loud by a woman with no reason to lie. Not a suspicion anymore. A fact. Why? Lila said. It came out small. Why is he doing this? He left me. He didn't want me. Why can't he just let me have one good thing? Oh, Lila. Eleanor's voice went unexpectedly gentle. Men like Evan Cross don't leave things because they don't want them. They leave things because they're bored, and they expect those things to sit exactly where they dropped them, gathering dust, still wanting them back. And then one day, the thing they threw away turns out to be standing on the arm of a better man, being desired by better people, doing better than they ever imagined, and it drives them out of their minds. It isn't love, dear. Don't ever mistake it for love. It's the tantrum of a child who threw away a toy and can't stand to see another child playing with it. A pause. The good news is that tantrums burn out, but they can do real damage first. So you keep that commander close, and you keep me closer, and you let us handle the Evan Crosses of the world, because between the United States Navy and my checkbook, dear, that boy is very badly outmatched and simply hasn't realized it yet. When Lila got off the phone with Eleanor, she sat in her office for a long time, and then she called Jack. You talked to Eleanor, he said before she could speak. She could hear the smile. She made 2 phone calls and erased the whole thing in a morning. And she told me, Jack, she confirmed it. It was Evan. He fed the photo to that woman and to the account through 2 different channels, so his name would never show up. She got the woman to admit it. Yeah, I figured it was him, but it's good to have it confirmed. A pause. I did some work on my end, too. The photo they used, the one of us, I found out where it came from. It wasn't a random guest. Cross paid a photographer at the gala to get shots of us specifically. That night. While I was standing there thinking I was helping you dodge one bad conversation, he was already 3 moves ahead, building a file. Lila closed her eyes. He planned this, from that night. He decided to destroy me before I even left the party. He decided to try, Jack corrected. There's a difference, and the difference is that it didn't work. Look at where you are. The post's gone. Eleanor's fiercer in your corner than she was yesterday. Your firm's fine, better than fine. And Sarah's name... His voice caught just slightly, then steadied. Sarah's name is off that website. And it's going to stay off because Eleanor Ashford is scarier than any of us. He took his best shot at you, Lila, his absolute best. And you're still standing, and he's the one who had to pay a photographer and lean on a hanger-on and hide behind 2 other people just to throw 1 rock. That's not a strong man, that's a scared one. He dragged your wife into it, Jack. She had to say it. I keep coming back to that. He used Grace's mother. I don't know how you're not. I would be out of my mind. There was a long silence on the line. I was, Jack said finally very quietly. Last night, after we hung up, I sat in my truck in the driveway for about an hour because I didn't want Grace to see my face until I had it under control. And I'm not going to lie to you and say I handled it like a saint. There was about 10 minutes there where I thought about exactly what I'd like to do to Evan Cross, and none of it was legal, and none of it was anything I'd want Grace to know her father was capable of. He exhaled. But then I thought about Sarah, about what she'd actually want. And Sarah Lila. Sarah was the least bitter person I ever met. She was sick for a year, and she spent it teaching an 8-year-old to read, and making me promise I wouldn't turn into a ghost after she was gone. She made me promise. And I broke that promise for 3 years. I turned into exactly the ghost she told me not to be, right up until a woman grabbed my arm at a party and asked me to lie for her. A pause. So the way I honor Sarah isn't by driving to Evan Cross's building and doing something I'd regret. It's by not letting a small, frightened man scare me back into being a ghost. It's by keeping the promise. Finally. Lila couldn't speak. "You still there?" Jack asked. "I'm here," she managed. "Jack, You don't have to say anything." "No, I do. I have to say this before I lose my nerve because I've been a coward about it for 3 weeks, and today made me realize I don't want to be a coward about it anymore." She stood up because she couldn't say it sitting down. "That deal. The one you offered me on the phone. Where I call you because I want to, and not because I need saving, and we figure out one small thing at a time, whether men like you are real." She took a breath. "I'm in. I've been in for 2 weeks, and I was too scared to say it. I want the deal. I want to find out. With you. I'm terrified, and I don't trust it, and I keep waiting for the bill even though you've told me 100 times there isn't one. But I want it anyway. I want you anyway. That's what I have to say." The silence on the other end lasted so long she started to panic. "Jack, say something. Please say something. I'm sorry," he said, and his voice was thick in a way she'd never heard it. "Give me a second. I wasn't expecting that today, and I'm a 44-year-old man, and I'm apparently about to cry in my office, so just give me a second." Lila laughed a broken, radiant sound and pressed her hand over her mouth. "Okay," Jack said finally. He'd gotten it back under control mostly. "Okay, here's what I want to say back. I'm in too. Obviously. I've been in since the terrace, if I'm being honest, since you told me about the 9 words and I wanted to find that man. And anyway, I'm in. But Lila, I need you to hear one thing, and I need you to really hear it, because it matters more than anything else I've said." "Okay, there's Grace." His voice was steady, now steady and serious. "If this is real, and I think it's real, I think it's the realest thing I've felt in 3 years, then at some point it stops being about you and me and starts being about a little girl who's already lost one person she loved down to the ground. I can risk my own heart all day long. That's mine to gamble, but I will not let her love you and then watch you go. So I have to ask you, and I need the true answer, not the answer you think I want. Are you sure? Not sure you want it today. Sure you can stay. Because the day I let you into that house is the day you become someone she counts on, and I have buried one person she counted on, and I am not. I cannot do that to her twice. So, are you sure?" And there it was. The realest question anyone had ever asked her. Not do you want me, but can you stay? Not for his sake, for a child's. Lila thought about her whole life. About her father who left when she was 9, the same age Grace was now. About every man who'd taught her that leaning meant falling. About Evan and the 9 words. About the version of herself who'd walked into that gala trying to be invisible, so sure that good things didn't come to her and stay. And she thought about the fact that she'd just spent an entire day doing nothing, trusting a man to carry something for her, and he had, and the sky hadn't fallen. The bill hadn't come. He'd carried it and handed her back a life that was better than the one she'd had before. "I'm not going to give you the easy answer," she said slowly. "Because you asked for the true one, and you deserve the true one, and so does she. So, here's the true one. I'm not sure of anything, Jack. I've been left too many times to be sure of anything. But I know that today, when I read Grace's mother's name on that website, my first thought wasn't protect myself. It was protect them. Protect you. Protect a little girl I've talked to on the phone exactly once about horses. And I've never. Jack, I have never once in my life put someone before myself like that, because I never had anyone safe enough to try it with." Her voice broke. "So I can't promise you I'm not scared. But I can promise you that when it counted today, My instinct was to stand in front of her, not behind you. And I think that's the closest thing to sure that a person like me can honestly offer. Is that enough? Can that be enough to start? Jack didn't answer right away, and when he did, his voice was the softest she'd ever heard it. Yeah, he said. That's enough to start. That's more than enough. That's Lila. That's the answer Sarah would have given, word for word. Stand in front of the kid. He laughed thick and wet. You'd have liked her. God, you'd have liked her. I think I'd have liked anyone who married you. No, he said. You really wouldn't have. I'm a nightmare to live with. Ask my sister. And then they were both laughing, and it was over the fear the day all of it dissolved into two people laughing on a phone line, because they'd just decided finally out loud to be real. They talked for another hour. They made a plan, a real one, careful the way Jack made all his plans. Lila would meet Grace properly in person, at a diner, low stakes, no pressure, and if it went well, it would go well, and if it didn't, they'd go slow. They'd deal with Evan through Eleanor, and through the paper trail Jack was quietly building, and they would not either of them let him goad them into a public fight, because a public fight was exactly what he wanted. He's going to try again, Jack warned her near the end. You know that. A man like that doesn't take one loss and walk away. The post getting killed, Eleanor shutting him down, that's going to make him angrier, not tamer. So we keep our heads. We don't give him a target. We let him swing at air until he wears himself out or does something stupid enough to end himself. You sound like you've fought this exact war before. Different uniform, same war. There's always somebody who'd rather burn the whole thing down than admit they lost. A pause. But here's what he doesn't understand about us, Lila. He thinks he's fighting a woman alone at a party. He's not. Not anymore. He's fighting you and me and Eleanor Ashford, and a dead woman's promise, and an 8-year-old who already decided you gave the correct answer about horses. That's not a fight he can win. He just hasn't figured it out yet. Lila sat in her tiny office as the light went gold outside her one window, and she realized she was smiling, really smiling, without fear underneath it for what might have been the first time in years. Jack, she said, thank you. For taking the day, for carrying it, for trading me seats. Anytime. She could hear his smile. That's the deal. That's the whole deal. A pause and then gentler. Get some sleep tonight and eat something. You still forget. I'll eat something. Promise? I promise. And she meant it, and she did, and it was the first meal in a long time she hadn't eaten alone in her head. But Evan Cross was not finished. Jack had been right about that. Somewhere across the city, in an apartment that cost more than Lila's whole year, a man who had thrown something away and could not stand to see it thriving was staring at a killed post and an unanswered scheme and feeling the specific poisonous rage of the outmaneuvered. He had one more move in him, a bigger one. The kind of move a man only makes when he stopped caring who gets hurt and started caring only about being right. And he was going to make it at the one place he knew they'd all be together out in the open, where he could do the most damage in front of the most people. He was going to make it at the Ashford Spring benefit, the very event Lila was pouring her new life into. The one that was supposed to prove she'd made it. The one where for the first time she'd be standing in that world not as staff, not as anyone's fake girlfriend, but as herself. He was going to walk into the one room where she finally felt safe, and he was going to try to take it all down at once. He just didn't know that this time she wouldn't be facing him alone. The diner came before the benefit, and Lila would always be grateful for the order of things that she met Grace over pancakes on a Saturday morning, before she ever had to stand in a ballroom and fight for her. She'd been so nervous she'd changed her outfit 3 times, which was ridiculous for a diner, and she knew it was ridiculous, and she did it anyway. Jack had told her not to bring anything, so of course she'd agonized over whether to bring something, and finally settled on nothing, and then felt naked walking in empty-handed. Grace was already in the booth when Lila arrived, kneeling on the seat so she could see over the table a small, serious person with Jack's steady gray eyes and a gap where a front tooth should have been. "Are you Lila?" Grace asked, before Lila had even sat down. I am. You said both. On the phone. Real horses, and the idea of them. Grace narrowed her eyes, taking Lila's measure with a scrutiny that was pure Jack. Most grown-ups just say real ones. To sound smart. Well, Lila said, sliding into the booth across from her, the idea of a horse is a pretty good idea, even if you never meet one. Grace considered this. Then she nodded once, a small judge issuing a favorable ruling. Correct. She turned to Jack, who was watching the whole exchange with the careful stillness of a man diffusing something. Dad, she's okay. You can relax your face now. My face is relaxed, Jack said. Your face is doing the thing it does at the doctor. Lila laughed, and Jack sighed, and Grace beamed. And just like that, the hardest introduction of Lila's life turned out to be the easiest thing in the world. They ate pancakes. Grace told Lila about her volcano which had erupted prematurely and ruined her aunt's kitchen, and about a girl at school named Madison, who was in Grace's expert opinion, a lot, and about how her mother used to make the pancakes better than Dad because Dad always burned the first 3. She said it lightly. My mom used to the way children say enormous things. And Lila watched Jack go still across the table, watched the old grief flicker over him, and did the only thing she could think to do. What did she do to keep them from burning? Lila asked. Grace blinked. What? Your mom. The pancakes. Do you remember how she kept the first ones from burning because your dad clearly hasn't cracked it, and between the two of us, we might be able to figure it out and save the world from his cooking? For a second, Grace just looked at her. Then something eased in the little girl's face, some tightness Lila hadn't even noticed was there until it let go. She turned the heat down, Grace said. After the first one. Dad leaves it up the whole time because he's impatient. I am not impatient, Jack said. You honked at a parked car yesterday. It was going to move. Grace looked at Lila with the weary solidarity of one reasonable person to another, and Lila understood that she had just passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Not the test of whether Grace liked her, but the harder one, the one about whether the memory of Grace's mother was allowed to sit at the table, spoken about alive, instead of being the thing everyone tiptoed around. Jack had spent 3 years tiptoeing, and a stranger had just invited Sarah into the booth over pancakes, easy as anything, and made the little girl lighter for it. Under the table, Jack found Lila's hand and squeezed it hard and didn't let go. That was the morning Lila stopped being afraid of the wrong things. The benefit was 3 weeks later, and in those 3 weeks, 2 things happened in parallel, like 2 trains running toward the same crossing. The first was that Lila and Jack and Grace quietly, carefully became something. Not a performance, now the realest thing any of them had. Lila learned how Grace liked her sandwiches cut, and which stuffed horse could not be slept without, and that Jack, for all his discipline, was hopeless at braiding hair, and had been paying his sister to do it for 3 years. Lila learned to braid on YouTube in an afternoon, so that Grace wouldn't have to wait for her aunt. And the first time she did it, Grace sat very still in front of the bathroom mirror and watched Lila's hands in the reflection and said in a very small voice, "My mom used to do this." And Lila said, "I know, sweetheart. I'm not trying to be her. I'm just trying to make sure your hair doesn't have to wait." And Grace had turned around and hugged her so hard and so suddenly that Lila had to grip the counter. And over the little girl's shoulder, she'd seen Jack standing in the doorway with his hand over his mouth, and none of them had said anything because there was nothing to say. The second thing was that Evan Cross went quiet, and Jack didn't trust it for a second. "He's not gone," Jack said the night before the benefit. They were on the phone the way they still were most nights, even now that they saw each other in person 3 times a week. Men like that don't go quiet because they've healed. They go quiet because they're loading. Eleanor shut down every angle he had. The post, the account, the woman who sent me the message. What's left for him to load? I don't know. That's what worries me. When you can't see the enemy, it's not because he left. It's because he got better at hiding. A pause. Tomorrow night, the benefit, that's the obvious place. It's the biggest room he can find you in. It's your night, your client, your career made real in front of everybody who matters. If I were him, and I wanted to do the most damage possible, that's where I'd do it. Right when you're happiest. Right in front of the most people. Lila's stomach tightened. You think he's coming? I think if he's coming anywhere, it's there. So here's what I want. I want you to run your event. That's your job. It's the biggest night of your career, and you're going to be magnificent. And I am not going to let Evan Cross take 1 second of that away from you. But I'm going to be there. I'm on the guest list anyway. Eleanor invited me weeks ago, and I'm going to be watching. And if he shows you, let me handle him. You don't engage. You don't defend yourself. You don't pick up the check. You do your job, and you let me stand between you and whatever he throws. That's the deal. That's what standing next to somebody means. Can you let me do that? And Lila, who 3 months ago would have insisted on facing everything alone, said, Yes, okay, yes. Good. A pause, and then softer. Grace made me promise to tell you something. What? She said, and I'm quoting, Tell Lila that if the bad man from the party comes, she should remember that we're her people now, and people fight for their people. Jack's voice was rough. 8 years old. I don't know where she gets it. I know exactly where she gets it, Lila said, and had to stop talking because her throat had closed. The benefit was everything Lila had built it to be. She'd poured herself into it for weeks, and it showed the room breathed, the timing flowed. The guests moved through the evening, the way water moves through a channel that's been dug, exactly right. Eleanor Ashford, resplendent in silver, caught Lila's eye across the room early in the night and gave her a small, fierce nod that said, You did this, girl. You did this yourself. For the first time in her life, Lila Morgan stood in a room full of glittering people and did not feel invisible and did not feel like staff and did not feel like she was waiting for the bill. She belonged. She'd built the belonging with her own 2 hands. And across the room, Jack Mercer stood in his dress uniform medals, catching the light, watching her with an expression that had nothing to do with performance. And every time their eyes met, she felt it land on her like sun through a window, the same as the first night. Except this time, it was real, and they both knew it. Grace wasn't there. It was a grown-up night, and she was home with Jack's sister, undoubtedly staying up too late. But Jack had her drawing folded in his breast pocket, a stick-figure family 3 figures and a horse, and he'd shown it to Lila when he arrived, and Lila had understood that he was carrying it the way other men carried lucky coins into places they were afraid of. Evan arrived at 9. Lila felt him before she saw him, that old animal awareness, the prickle at the back of the neck. She turned, and there he was crossing the room in a tuxedo alone. This time no woman in red on his arm, and there was something wrong with his face. The confident smirk was still there, but underneath it was something looser, hotter, less controlled. He'd been drinking, and he was walking straight toward her with the specific momentum of a man who had made a decision and burned the ships behind him. Jack was there before Evan was. He didn't rush. He never rushed. He just crossed the room on a diagonal and arrived at Lila's side a half-second before Evan did, and turned to stand beside her shoulder to shoulder the exact configuration from the first night, the single unit facing the room. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His presence said it. Well, Evan said, stopping in front of them. His voice was too loud. A few nearby heads turned. The happy couple. Still selling it, I see. Or is it real now? I can never tell with you two. Evan, Lila said, and her voice was steadier than she'd dreamed it could be. You're drunk. Go home. I'm not drunk. He was drunk. I'm curious. See, I've been thinking about you two. A lot. Because it doesn't add up. He turned to the small crowd that was starting to form, playing to it the showman even now. Ladies and gentlemen, a little story. 3 months ago, this woman, a party planner working this exact circuit for scraps, bumps into a decorated war hero at a gala, and poof, they're in love. Just like that. And now she's got Eleanor Ashford's account and her own firm, and she's standing here like she belongs. He smiled, and it was ugly. Doesn't that seem convenient to anyone? A woman with nothing who suddenly has everything the second she gets her hooks into a man with a name and a pension and a... Stop talking. Jack's voice cut across the room, quiet and absolute. Evan turned to him, delighted to finally be engaging the man directly. "Or what, Commander? You'll have me court-martialed. I'm a civilian. You've got no rank over me. You've got nothing over me except a woman who traded up, and everybody in this room can see it. They're just too polite to—" I said stop. Jack still hadn't raised his voice, but there was something in it now that made the whole gathering crowd go quiet, the way a room goes quiet when a professional walks in. "You're not curious, Mr. Cross. You're not confused about how any of this adds up. You know exactly how it adds up. You just can't stand the math." He took one step forward, putting himself squarely between Evan and Lila. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around, and you're going to walk out of Mrs. Ashford's event, and you're going to leave this woman alone, tonight and every night after. Or—" "There's no or." Jack's face was calm as still water. "I'm not threatening you. I've got nothing to threaten you with. You're right about that. I'm just telling you how it's going to go because I've read the whole situation, and there's only one ending where you keep any dignity, and it's the one where you leave right now." Evan laughed, but it came out cracked. He was losing the room, and he could feel it. And losing made him reckless, the way Eleanor had said, the tantrum of a child who couldn't stand to see another child playing with the toy. "You want to know what she is?" Evan said louder now to the crowd, spit flying. "I'll tell you what she is. I dated her. 2 years. And when she fell apart, when she lost her job and her apartment and her mother all went down the drain at once, you know what she did. She turned into a black hole. She'd have dragged me down with her. Any sane man would have—" "Left by text," Lila said. The whole room heard it. Evan stopped. Lila stepped out from behind Jack, not because she needed to fight, but because she was done letting anyone tell her story but her. "That's what you did, Evan. When my mother was dying and I was losing everything, you didn't have a hard conversation. You didn't sit with me. You sent me a text message, 9 words. 'I don't think I can do this anymore. Sorry.' And then you blocked my number so I couldn't reply." She wasn't crying. She was very calm, and her calm was more devastating than any tears would have been. "So when you stand in this room and ask everyone what kind of woman I am, the answer is, I'm the woman who was falling apart and got left by a coward with a phone, and who survived it, and who built all of this." She gestured at the room, the flawless event, the life she'd made, by myself, before I ever met him. She nodded toward Jack. "He didn't give me any of this, Evan. I earned every inch of it. What he gave me was the thing you never once managed in 2 years. He stood next to me. The silence in that ballroom was total. Evan's face had gone through several colors and landed on a mottled, furious red. He'd lost, and everyone could see he'd lost, and the losing had stripped away whatever remained of his control. "You think you've won something?" he said, and his voice had dropped into something venomous and low. "You think you're safe now, hiding behind him and his uniform and his little sob story about his dead?" He didn't finish the word. Because Jack Mercer moved, and for the first time all night it was fast, not violent, not a blow, nothing anyone could later describe as an assault. He simply closed the distance and put himself an inch from Evan's face, close enough that no one else could hear what he said. And whatever it was brief, and it was quiet, and it drained every ounce of blood from Evan Cross's face in the space of about 4 seconds. Evan stepped back. He was shaking now, and it wasn't rage anymore. It was fear. "That's slander," Evan said, but his voice had lost all its air. "That's you can't—" "I didn't say anything anyone else can hear," Jack said at normal volume now, pleasant for the crowd. "I just reminded Mr. Cross of a few facts about his situation. About some phone records. About a photographer he paid. About a woman he had sent a message. About a gossip account he fed a story to." Jack's voice was mild as milk. "See, Mr. Cross, while you were busy trying to burn down a woman who never did anything to you but survive you, some of us were quietly keeping receipts. And Eleanor Ashford, who I believe you know, has copies of everything. So do her lawyers. So does a friend of mine who does this kind of thing for the Navy, and got very interested when he learned a man was using a fallen sailor's spouse to run a smear campaign. That last part's a real problem for you, by the way. There are people in Washington who take that personally. Evan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. You've got two choices. Jack went on, still perfectly calm. You can keep going right here in front of Mrs. Ashford and every donor on this circuit, and we can have the whole thing out in the open, the photographer, the messages, all of it on the record with witnesses. Or you can leave quietly tonight and never speak this woman's name again, and we let the receipts stay in the drawer. Your call. But you're going to make it in the next 10 seconds, because Mrs. Ashford is walking over here right now, and I promise you, she is not as gentle as I am. Eleanor Ashford was indeed cutting through the crowd like an icebreaker. Silver and terrible, and the look on her face was the look of a woman who had buried a husband, and would not have a dead mother's memory dragged through her ballroom. Evan Cross looked at Jack. He looked at Lila. He looked at the crowd of the very people whose good opinion was the only currency he'd ever truly valued, all of them watching him with the dawning contempt reserved for a man who'd just been revealed as small. And Lila watched the exact moment he understood that he'd lost not the argument, but the war, the whole thing, that he'd thrown a rock at a woman he thought was standing alone and discovered too late that she was standing in a fortress. He turned and walked out. He didn't say another word. He didn't look back. And the crowd in the way of crowds closed over the space where he'd been, as if he'd never existed at all. Eleanor arrived a beat too late for the confrontation, and looked almost disappointed. Did I miss it? He's leaving, Jack said. Pity. I had such a speech prepared. Eleanor turned to Lila, and her whole face changed, the ice melting into something maternal and fierce. Are you all right, dear? Yes. Lila was shaking now that it was over, the adrenaline draining out of her all at once. I'm okay. I think I'm okay. You were magnificent. I heard the whole thing. He stood next to me. Oh, I nearly applauded. Eleanor patted her cheek. Now, this is still my benefit, and there are 300 people who need to see the host looking serene, so I'm going to go be serene, and you two are going to go somewhere and breathe, and then you're going to come back and finish running the best event this circuit has seen in a decade. Understood. And she swept off, already smiling at a senator, which left Lila and Jack standing in the middle of the ballroom in the wreckage of a war that had ended almost before it began. What did you say to him? Lila asked quietly. At the end, when you got close. Jack was quiet for a moment. I told him the facts. The photographer, the records, the Navy friend. All true. Every word. That's not all you said. His face, Jack, whatever you said scared him in a way the facts didn't. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly. I told him that the woman he threw away was the best thing that ever walked into a room, and he was going to spend the rest of his life knowing he had her and lost her because he was a coward, and that no amount of money or golf or gossip was ever going to fix the fact that when it counted, he ran and I stayed. A pause. And that every time he saw us happy from now on, because he will. This is a small world, he was going to feel exactly what he made you feel that day. Small. And there was nothing he could do about it because it was the truth, and the truth was the one thing he'd never been able to buy. Lila stared at him. That's why he was scared, Jack said simply. Facts you can fight. Lawyers, records, all of it. A man like that thinks he can lawyer his way out of anything. But the truth about who he is, that there's no defense against, that one he has to live with. He shrugged a little helplessly. Sarah taught me that, near the end. She said the cruelest thing you can ever do to a cruel person is refuse to become cruel back and just be happy right in front of them. She said it drives them crazier than any revenge. She was right about most things. She was right about that. Lila didn't say anything. She couldn't. She just reached out and took his hand right there in the middle of the ballroom in front of everyone, not to prove anything to anyone, not as a performance, but because it was the only thing her body knew how to do. And Jack looked down at their hands and then up at her, and something passed between them that had been building for 3 months since a whispered lie at a gala through a phone call in the dark, and a day of trusting, and a diner full of pancakes and 100 braided mornings. "Lila," he said low just for her. "The first night. At the other gala. When Evan challenged us to prove it, and I asked if you wanted it to stop, and you said yes, and I—" He stopped. "Do you remember?" Of course she remembered. She'd thought about it every day for 3 months. The kiss in the first ballroom, the one that was supposed to be a performance, and hadn't been, not even a little the one they'd both spent weeks pretending was just an act. "I remember," she said. "That wasn't fake." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I need you to know that. It was never fake. Not for 1 second. I told myself it was for weeks because I was scared, because it was too fast, because of Grace, because of Sarah. I had 100 reasons. But it was never fake. I kissed you that night because I wanted to, and I've wanted to every day since, and I've been too disciplined and too careful and too much of a coward in my own way to just, Jack, to just tell you the truth, which is that Jack." Lila stepped closer and put her free hand flat against his chest over the medals over his heart. The exact gesture he'd made for her on the first night to fool a room full of strangers, except now, there was no one to fool. "I know. I've known since the terrace. Stop being a coward and finish your sentence." And Commander Jack Mercer, who had faced down Evan Cross without raising his voice, who had stared down worse than that in 22 years of service, looked at the woman standing in front of him with her hand over his heart and finished his sentence the only way that mattered. He kissed her. Not for the room. Not to make a point. Not to shift a power dynamic or fool an ex or save a stranger from humiliation. He kissed her because he loved her, and he'd spent 3 months being too disciplined to admit it, and he was done being disciplined about the one thing in his life that had finally cracked the ghost open and let the man walk out. The ballroom 300 strong saw it happen. And this time, no one whispered. This time, somewhere near the bar, someone started to clap, and then someone else did, and then Eleanor Ashford's voice rang out over the crowd, delighted and imperious. "Oh, finally, someone get these two a drink." And the whole room laughed, and the whole room applauded, and Lila Morgan stood in the middle of a life she'd built, with her own 2 hands being kissed by a man who wanted nothing from her but her, and understood all at once and forever that the bill was never coming. There had never been a bill. There had only ever been a man willing to trade her seats. When they finally broke apart, both of them, a little unsteady, Jack pressed his forehead to hers and laughed low and helpless and happy. "Grace is going to be insufferable," he murmured. "She called this 3 weeks ago. She said, 'Dad, you're going to marry Lila.' And I said, 'Grace, we're taking it slow.' And she looked at me like I was the dumbest man alive. She usually does. She usually is right." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and the careful, disciplined distance he'd hidden behind for 3 months was simply gone, burned away. Nothing left but the man. "I don't want to take it slow anymore, Lila. I've been taking everything slow for 3 years. Slow is just fear wearing a nicer coat. I'm done with it." Lila's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying come home." His voice was rough. "Not tonight, you've got an event to run, and Eleanor will have my head. But soon. I'm saying stop going home to that empty apartment where you eat standing up and forget to eat at all. I'm saying come home to a house where there's a kid who already loves you, and a man who already loves you, and pancakes that are only slightly burnt because somebody finally taught me to turn the heat down." He swallowed. "I'm saying be our people. For real. All the way. No more slow." And Lila Morgan, who had walked into a gala 3 months ago, trying to be invisible, so certain that good things didn't come to her, and stay, who had been left by her father, and left by Evan, and left by every man who'd ever taught her. That leaning meant falling, stood in a ballroom full of applause, with her hand over the heart of a man who had never once lied to her, and gave him the truest answer of her life. But before she could say it, before the word could leave her mouth, her phone buzzed in the small clutch at her side. And then it buzzed again. And again. And Jack's phone buzzed too, in his breast pocket right next to Grace's drawing. They looked at each other. Jack pulled out his phone. And Lila watched the color drain from his face for the second time that night, except this time it wasn't strategy, and it wasn't calm, and it wasn't the commander. It was a father. "It's my sister," he said. His voice had gone strange and tight. "It's Grace." "What does it say?" Lila demanded. "Jack, what does it say?" He was already moving, already turning toward the doors, his hand closing around her wrist, and pulling her with him through the crowd. She fell. Grace fell. "My sister says she was climbing on the bookshelf. She was trying to reach something on top, and it came down and—" His voice broke on the next word, and he didn't finish it. "They're at the hospital. Mount Sinai. My sister says she's conscious, but they're worried about her arm and maybe her head, and I need to be there. I need to—" "Then we go." Lila didn't hesitate. "We go right now. Give me your keys. You're in no shape to drive." "I can drive." "You honked at a parked car, Jack. Give me the keys." He gave her the keys. That, more than anything, told her how afraid he was. Commander Jack Mercer, who had never once in 3 months relinquished control of anything, handing over his truck keys without a fight because his hands were shaking too badly to trust them. They didn't tell Eleanor. There wasn't time. Lila caught the eye of her assistant across the room, mouthed emergency. "You've got it." And the girl nodded, and that was the whole handoff of the biggest night of Lila's career, gone abandoned mid-triumph without a second thought, because a little girl was in a hospital, and there was no version of Lila Morgan that would have chosen anything else. She drove. Jack sat in the passenger seat with his phone pressed to his ear, getting updates from his sister, and Lila had never seen him like this. The careful control cracked wide open the ghost, and the commander both burned away, nothing left but a father whose child was hurt and who was not there. "She keeps asking for me," Jack said, half to Lila, half to himself. "Bethany says she keeps asking where I am. She's scared, and I'm not there, and I'm never there. That's the thing about all of it. The Navy, the deployments, 3 years of my sister braiding her hair because I couldn't. And now the one night I'm out being happy, being at a party kissing a woman in a ballroom, while my kid is—" "Stop!" Lila's voice was sharp enough to cut through it. She kept her eyes on the road, but reached over and gripped his hand hard. "Stop that right now. You do not get to do that." "Do what?" "Turn this into your fault. Turn it into proof that you don't deserve to be happy." She took the turn onto Madison too fast and didn't care. "Kids fall, Jack. Kids climb bookshelves and fall. It happens in houses where both parents are home. It happens on Tuesday afternoons. It has nothing to do with you being at a party. And I am not going to sit here and let you use your daughter's accident to talk yourself back into being a ghost. Not after everything. Not tonight. She needs her father, not a man drowning in guilt in the passenger seat. So you're going to breathe, and we're going to get there, and you're going to walk in and be exactly what she needs, which is calm. You're good at calm. Be calm for her." Jack looked at her, and something in his face steadied, not all the way, but enough. "You just gave me an order." "Somebody had to. You'd trade your whole life away in guilt if I let you. It's my turn to stand next to you." She squeezed his hand again. "That's the deal, remember? You trade me seats when I'm carrying too much. Well, you're carrying too much. So I've got it. I've got the driving, and I've got the calm, and I've got you. Just get us there in one piece and let me have this one." And Jack Mercer, who had spent 22 years being the one who carried everyone else, sat in the passenger seat of his own truck and let a woman carry him. And Lila would think later that it was in that exact moment, not the kiss, not the ballroom, not anything as pretty as that she knew for certain she was going to spend the rest of her life with this man. Because loving someone in a ballroom was easy. Loving them at 90 miles an hour, on the way to a hospital, holding them together when they were falling apart was the real thing. And she wanted the real thing. She'd wanted it her whole life, and never once believed it would be offered to her. They ran through the ER doors together. Bethany was in the waiting room, Jack's sister pale and stricken, and she stood up the second she saw them. "Jack? Oh, thank God she's okay. They think she's okay. It's her arm, it's broken, and they did a scan of her head because she hit it, but the doctor thinks it's just a bump. They're being careful. She's awake. She's asking for... Where is she? Jack was already moving. Room 6, but Jack... Bethany caught his arm. She's scared. She's really scared. And she keeps asking for you, but she also keeps asking for... Bethany's eyes went to Lila, confused, taking her in. She keeps asking for someone named Lila. Who's Lila? The room went quiet. Lila felt it hit her in the chest like a physical thing. A little girl hurt and frightened in a hospital bed, asking for her father and asking for her. Not for her aunt who'd raised her half her life. For Lila. For a woman she'd known 3 weeks. I'm Lila, she said. Bethany looked at her and then at Jack, and something passed over her face, surprise, and then understanding, and then a kind of wonder. You're Lila, she said slowly. You're the one who taught her to braid. She showed me. She's been doing it herself badly, but she's so proud of it, she said you taught her so she wouldn't have to wait for me anymore. Bethany's eyes filled. Go, both of you. She's asking for both of you. Go. They went. Grace was small in the hospital bed, smaller than Lila had ever seen her. Her arm in a temporary splint, a bandage above one eyebrow, her face blotchy from crying. But when the door opened and she saw them, both of them together, her whole face crumpled with relief. Dad. And then, in the same breath, reaching out with her good arm, Lila. Jack got to her first, folding around her, carefully mindful of the arm, murmuring something low and steady into her hair, and Lila hung back for half a second, because this was his moment. His daughter, and she didn't want to intrude until Grace's good hand shot out from around her father's neck and grabbed a fistful of Lila's dress and pulled, and Lila had no choice but to come in close. And then she was folded into it too, the 3 of them, one knot of arms and relief in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic. I fell, Grace announced, muffled into her father's chest. I heard, baby. You scared us. I was trying to get the horse book, the one on the top shelf. Aunt Beth said I couldn't have it before bed, but I wanted it and I climbed and the whole thing came down. Grace pulled back, indignant, even now, even hurt. It's a stupid shelf. It should be more attached to the wall. I'll bolt it to the wall tomorrow, Jack said, and his voice cracked right down the middle. I promise. First thing. Grace looked at Lila. Her lower lip was trembling. Lila, I broke my arm. I can see that, sweetheart. Will you still teach me to braid if I only have one arm? And Lila Morgan, who had spent her whole life certain that she was the kind of person good things left, who had been abandoned by her father and her fiancé, and every man who'd ever taught her that. Leaning meant falling, sat down on the edge of a hospital bed, and took a frightened little girl's uninjured hand, and understood that she had just been asked the most important question anyone had ever asked her. Not, do you love me? Not, will you stay? Will you still be here even now that I'm broken? It was the exact question Lila herself had needed answered her whole life. The question Evan had answered with 9 words and a blocked number. The question her father had answered by leaving. And now here it was coming back around, asked by a child in a hospital bed. And Lila got to be the one to answer it right the way no one had ever answered it for her. Grace, she said, listen to me. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to remember it. Okay? Even when you're grown up. Even when you're old. I need you to remember that when you were 8 years old, and you broke your arm, and you were scared in a hospital, you asked me if I'd still teach you to braid. She smoothed the little girl's hair back from the bandage. And I said, of course I will. A broken arm doesn't change anything. Broken doesn't change anything. That's the whole point of people who are really yours. They don't leave when you break. They get closer. Her voice was steady, though her eyes were not. I will teach you to braid with one arm. I will teach you to braid with no arms. We'll figure it out. We'll invent a whole new way. Because I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not when you're better, not ever. Do you understand me? I am not going anywhere. Grace stared at her with Jack's steady gray eyes, and something in the little girl's face settled the same thing Lila had seen settle at the diner over the pancakes when she'd invited Sarah's memory to the table. The thing that let go. Okay, Grace whispered. And then because she was 8, and because 8-year-olds are the most resilient creatures on earth. Can you teach me tomorrow? I'm really tired. Tomorrow? Lila promised. I'll be there when you wake up. Both of you. Both of us, Jack said, and pulled them both in again and over the top of his daughter's head. He looked at Lila, and Lila looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying that hadn't just been said by a woman making a promise to a child. Grace was kept overnight for observation. The scan came back clean, a bump nothing worse, the doctors relieved and reassuring. The arm was a clean break that would heal in 6 weeks. By midnight, she was asleep, her good hand still tangled in Lila's dress, refusing to let go even in sleep. And Jack and Lila sat on either side of the bed in the dark and watched her breathe. You didn't have to do that, Jack said quietly after a long time. The promise. That was a big thing to promise a kid. You could have just said something soft and gotten out of it. Most people would have. I know. So why didn't you? Lila looked at Grace's sleeping face at the small hand knotted in her dress. Because somebody should have said it to me, she said. When I was her age. When my dad left. Somebody should have sat on the edge of my bed and told me that broken doesn't change anything, that the people who are really yours get closer when you break, not farther. Nobody ever did. I had to learn the opposite instead. I had to learn that everyone leaves, that leaning means falling, that good things don't stay. She reached across the bed and found Jack's hand in the dark. I've spent 34 years believing that. And then 3 months ago, a man refused to let go of my hand at a party, and every single day since then, you and this kid have been proving me wrong. So when she asked me that question, the exact question I needed answered my whole life, I wasn't going to answer it the way it got answered for me. I was going to answer it right. For her. And for the 8-year-old version of me who never got an answer at all. Jack was quiet for a moment. In the dim light, she could see that he was crying silently, the way she'd taught herself to cry, and she understood that he'd learned it the same way she had alone, so no one would hear. You know I was going to ask you to marry me, he said. In the ballroom, right before the phones went off. That whole speech about coming home, about no more slow, that was me working up to it. I had it all planned out. I was going to do it right there in front of everybody. He laughed, wet and rough. And then my kid fell off a bookshelf and blew up my whole plan, which is exactly the kind of thing she'd do. Lila's heart stopped. Jack, I'm not going to do it now. He wiped his face with his free hand. Not in a hospital at midnight with our clothes still smelling like the benefit and both of us running on adrenaline and fear. That's not how you want to remember it. That's not the story you tell the grandkids. He squeezed her hand. But I'm telling you it's coming. Soon. On a normal day, a good day when Grace's arm is healed and we're doing something ordinary, I'm going to ask you, and I want you to have plenty of time to know it's coming. Because I never want you to feel ambushed by a good thing again. You've spent your whole life braced for the bad ambush. I want you to get to see the good one coming from a mile away. His voice went soft. So, consider yourself warned, Lila Morgan. There's a ring in your future, and there's no catch, and the bill is never coming. There was never a bill. Lila laughed and cried at the same time, and pressed the back of his hand to her lips, and across the bed between them. Grace stirred and murmured something about horses, and settled again, and the three of them sat there in the dark hospital room, and it was Lila. Thought the most perfect moment of her entire life. Not the ballroom, not the kiss, not the applause. This, the aftermath, the ordinary, terrifying, holy business of loving people enough to sit in the dark and watch them breathe. They were married in the fall. It was not a big wedding. Lila could have planned a spectacular one, could have called in every favor on the Ashford circuit, could have made it the event of the season. She planned events for a living now. Her firm had 3 employees and a waiting list. But she didn't want spectacular. She'd spent her whole life on the outside of spectacular looking in. What she wanted was small and true, and hers. So they married in Eleanor Ashford's garden on a September afternoon with maybe 40 people. Bethany was there, And Sarah's mother came in from Ohio because Jack had called her, had told her everything, had asked her blessing. And the older woman had wept on the phone and said Sarah would have loved her, would have loved that Grace had someone to braid her hair. Eleanor Ashford gave a toast that made everyone cry, and then made everyone laugh, which was a very Eleanor thing to do. And Grace, whose arm had healed months ago, who could braid now badly but proudly, Grace walked Lila down the aisle. That had been Grace's idea. She'd announced it one night at dinner, apropos of nothing, in her small, imperious voice. "I'm walking Lila down the aisle, because she doesn't have a dad to do it, and I'm going to be her daughter, so I should." And Lila had had to leave the table, and Jack had found her crying in the kitchen 10 minutes later, and neither of them had been able to explain to Grace exactly what she'd done, only that it was the correct thing, the most correct thing anyone had ever done. So on a September afternoon, in a garden, an 8-year-old girl with a healed arm and a serious face walked a 34-year-old woman down an aisle toward a man in his dress uniform, and when they reached the front, Grace didn't sit down. She stood between them holding both their hands, and when the officiant asked who gave this woman to be married, Grace said loudly before anyone else could speak, "I do. She's ours now." And the whole garden laughed and cried, and Jack looked at Lila over the top of their daughter's head and mouthed, "I told you the good one was coming." And Lila mouthed back, "I saw it coming from a mile away." And it was true. She had, for the first time in her life, she'd seen a good thing coming and let herself run toward it, instead of bracing for the blow. Evan Cross was not there, obviously. But he was in a way the reason for all of it, because if he hadn't been at that first gala laughing with his woman in red, Lila would never have panicked and grabbed a stranger's arm, and the stranger would never have refused to let go. Lila thought about that sometimes, the terrible mathematics of it, how the worst man she'd ever known had accidentally handed her the best thing in her life. She never thanked him for it. He didn't deserve thanks. But she stopped hating him somewhere along the way, because hating him took up room she'd rather fill with other things. Eleanor had been right in the end. The cruelest thing you could do to a cruel person was to be happy right in front of them, and then to stop thinking about them at all. Lila did both. She heard eventually that Evan had moved to the West Coast, that the circuit had cooled on him after the benefit, that the story of the night, a Navy commander, quietly dismantled him in front of Eleanor Ashford's whole donor list, had followed him around like a bad smell. She felt nothing about it. That was the victory. Not that he'd fallen. That she no longer cared whether he had. The night of the wedding, after everyone had gone home, after Grace had finally crashed in a heap of tulle and exhaustion, Jack and Lila sat on the back steps of the house that was now fully and legally and forever theirs. She still had her firm. He'd taken a shore posting so he wouldn't deploy while Grace was young, a desk he claimed to hate and secretly loved because it meant he was home for pancakes every morning, which he still burned because he was still impatient, because he still honked at parked cars. "You know what I keep thinking about," Lila said, leaning into him. "What?" "The first night. On the terrace. When you asked me why it had to be you, I grabbed, and I said it could have been anybody. Any solid thing in the room." She tilted her head up to look at him. "I was wrong. It couldn't have been anybody. It could only ever have been you. Anybody else would have pulled their arm away. Anybody else would have laughed or said no or said yes and then wanted something for it. You're the only man in that entire room, maybe the only man in the world, who would have just said okay and meant it and stood next to me all night and asked for nothing. It had to be you. I just didn't know it yet." Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to know the truth? It couldn't have been anybody for me either. I'd gone to 1,000 of those parties. Nobody ever grabbed my arm. Nobody ever needed anything from me that I could actually give. They wanted donations, connections, a name on a letterhead. And then this woman in a dress that didn't cost anything grabbed my arm and asked me for the one thing I had that money can't buy. She asked me to just stand there, to be solid, to not leave." He kissed the top of her head. "That's the only thing I've ever been any good at, Lila. Standing there, being solid, not leaving. I couldn't save Sarah. I stood right next to her, and I couldn't save her, and it about killed me. And then you asked me for the one thing I could actually do. Stand next to somebody and not leave. You gave me a way to be useful with the only skill I had left." His voice went rough. "So no, it couldn't have been anybody. You needed a man who wouldn't let go, and I needed somebody to hold on to. We were both wrong about being wrong for each other. It was the only match in the whole room." Lila didn't say anything. She just took his hand, the same hand she'd grabbed at a gala 11 months ago, the hand that had folded around hers and never once let go, and she held it, and they sat on the back steps of their house in the dark. Two people who had each spent years certain that leaning meant falling, learning every single ordinary day that sometimes leaning meant being held. Inside, a little girl slept in a heap of tulle, dreaming about horses with two parents in the house, instead of one, and a braid in her hair that her mother had taught her, and another mother now who had promised her that broken doesn't change anything. Lila Morgan had walked into a charity gala 11 months ago in a clearance rack dress, trying to be invisible, so certain that good things didn't come to people like her and stay. She had been wrong about everything. The good thing had come, and it had stayed, and it was never ever going to leave, because she had finally, after 34 years, chosen the one man in the world who understood that the whole point of love isn't the grand gesture in the ballroom or the kiss in front of the crowd. The whole point of love is the hand that doesn't let go, the seat you trade when someone's carrying too much, the promise you make to a broken child in a hospital bed at midnight, the pancakes slightly burnt, made every single morning by someone who chose to stay. She had spent her whole life waiting for a bill that was never coming. And now, at last, she stopped waiting and started living the life she had earned beside the man who stood next to her in the family that was finally and forever hers.